Hi, it's Laura from Empowered Decision, and what we're going to talk about is interview preparation. So maybe you haven't been for an interview for quite some time, or you're maybe interviewing at a different role and you're feeling a little bit nervous. By running through this and doing the right preparation, you can go into those interviews feeling a lot more confident. So the good news is that when you're asked to an interview, you have already made it to the shortlist. So that means that your skills, experience, and qualifications are close enough for you to stand a good chance at landing that role. The thing to think about with an interview is, yes, they're looking at assessing your ability to do the job, but it's a lot more than just about your hard skills. It's also about soft skills. So how you fit into the team, how you come across, what you'd be like to work with. So we'll cover some of those things. Equally important components, your preparation. So the company are looking for what you know about their company and for you to be able to explain why you're interested in the role. It's also your ability to demonstrate your motivation and interest. So your goals, what inspires you, really what makes you as a person. They're trying to understand who you are. And as mentioned, your soft skills. So again, these factors depend on the role that you're going for, but the types of things that they might be looking for is your ability to communicate, how you take direction, how you respond to deadlines, how you build relationships, those sorts of things. So the goal of the interview is obviously to secure a job offer. Sometimes people come to me and they say, well, I'm not sure going to the interview whether I want to move ahead with this role. And I always say to them, the best thing to do is prepare and to be ready for the role and perform the best that you can in the interview. And then if it turns out that there's factors that make you not want to move ahead, at least it's your choice. There's nothing worse than going for an interview and realizing afterwards that actually you really liked the role, but maybe you weren't as prepared or you didn't put yourself across in the best way. So our goal is to impress, to be able to sell yourself or represent yourself best and demonstrate the benefits of having you on board for a potential employer. So always recommend research before you go for an interview. Make sure that you have time before the interview to do some research, because if you arrive half an hour early and you're looking at things, it's very difficult to retain that and be able to speak about that in an interview. So I would always say put some time aside so that you can calmly go through and do your research. Doing this enables you to feel more confident. You'll understand the company culture, the history, what the company does, and obviously be able to answer more relevant questions. And this is as much a part of you making sure that you want to work at the company as it is preparing for the interview. So to me, when I'm doing research, I'm both preparing for an interview, but also assessing if it's the right opportunity for me. So generally, when you go for an interview, you'll be told who will attend that interview. And I always recommend that you find that out, because it is quite different if you've got a one-on-one, fairly casual meeting with someone, or if you're maybe got a panel interview with, say, 3 interviewers. You can always find that out from the person who's arranging the interview. When I know the names of those people, I try and find out anything I can about them. So LinkedIn can be a really good tool for this. You can look at how long they've been at the company, what their role is and what their responsibilities are. But you also, and perhaps where they worked at before, but you also get that softer stuff. So what are the things that are important to them? What are they posting about? What are they liking? Do they say anything about the company? So that just helps you give an idea of how you can connect with those people in the interview, and the sorts of things that they'd be interested in hearing about. Also, a useful tip on LinkedIn is that if you're looking someone up, LinkedIn will indicate to you if you know someone who has worked there before, or you've got people in common. So sometimes that can help you if you know someone who's either worked there, or you can phone a friend who perhaps knows them from somewhere else. I also recommend that you really plow through the company website. So have a look at all the menu options, in particular the company's mission or vision and values. That's really important to understand how they're presenting themselves and what's important to them. Also, the main focus of the business or the core of the business. Make sure that you understand what it is that the company actually does. Always find out the name of the CEO. And sometimes they've got made press releases or statements, and you can hear how they're talking about their company. where the company's headquartered, their locations, any recent news. So look for achievements, projects won, initiatives. I also find out looking at events. So if you're looking at corporate responsibility, charities, team building, all those kind of things can help to give you a picture about what's important to the company and the values that they have. And I also recommend that you have a look at social media and just do a quick internet search, see if there's anything about the company. So now we're going to have a look at common questions. So we'll look at some common questions which tend to be asked across industries and job titles, and then we'll show you how to prepare for the questions that potential employers are likely to ask. What I want you to do is think through how you would answer those questions. So feel free, if you're working through this, to just pause and think about how you would respond to those questions. In terms of an interview format, the content of the interview often reflects who is interviewing you. So if you're being interviewed by an HR manager, they'll often focus on your fit to the job description and maybe cultural fit. A technical manager, he or she might focus more on your depth of skills and where you've used those skills. And a team manager may focus more on your ability to work in a team, deliver results. So everyone's sort of coming from their perspective about how that would impact on them and their, the importance of that fit to what they're looking for. So often by finding out who's interviewing, you can concentrate and work out what they'll concentrate on in the interview. So when you attend an interview, it generally starts with some softer questions to break the ice and relax. This does depend on whether you're going for a government or more regulated role, or you're going to another type of company. So if you're going for one, and this is often indicated if you need to fill in selection criteria as part of the application, those interviews tend to be a little bit more formal. There'll be a number of people in the interview. There may be someone recording your responses, and generally your responses are recorded against a rating system. In other kinds of companies, it can be a bit more informal, and generally the beginning of that interview is more informal. They might chat about your day so far or something like that, just so that everyone relaxes a bit. But then the focus will turn to the most important aspects of the role. So the interviewers are keen to make a relatively quick decision, so that's what they'll focus on after the introduction. One thing to note is it's very difficult to prepare for every single question that might come up in an interview. And I think sometimes if people are anxious before an interview, that's the path that they tend to take. So they might write down every single question that they could conceivably ask. And then what they tend to do is write notes about that so that they can feel that they can properly sort of portray that experience. I find what happens and people do ask me, can you take notes into an interview? And the answer is no. Remember, an interview is about you communicating and building a relationship with the people that are interviewing you. What is better is that you think through the questions. So if there's questions that worrying you, that you pop them down and you think through what your responses could be. But part of what we'll show you is how to practice a format so that you feel comfortable that even if you're throwing some questions that maybe didn't anticipate, that you've got a sort of way of answering them. And remembering that what we're trying to do here is to show our strengths, differentiate our experience, and just be prepared so that when we go in, we feel confident about expressing our skills and abilities. So typical question, tell me about yourself. This is often an opener just to get the ball rolling, get the interview going, to establish a bit of a connection, but it's mostly about getting an understanding of your communication skills and your relevant experience. So things to think about in responding is, I always prepare how I summarize my skills, experience and qualifications, and you only want to take a couple of minutes to do that. So they don't want the whole recap from primary school or anything like that, where people are looking as relevant experience. So if you had a prior career, it's fine to very briefly describe that and then move on to perhaps where you made that conversion into a new industry. But people might start with a qualification, so TAFE or university or something like that. And then obviously as they go through there'll be more emphasis on more recent experience. What you do want to try and mention there is any, maybe your biggest career achievement, something that makes you stand out a little bit from other people, and to focus on your most recent relevant experience. So that might be your current situation, or it might be a role before. And you can lead that into why you're interested in the role. So a quick recap, a story, I suppose, of where you've come from, and then bringing that to your interest in the role. So what I'd encourage you to do now is to just pop a pause and to think through your kind of 2-minute prep. Now, as I said, it's a very different thing being able to write something down and being able to confidently express it. And that's often where the interview preparation comes in. So what I say to people is, when you're in your car and you're driving along, practice answering those questions. It's actually the experience of physically saying them gets your brain into that zone where those words come out, rather than you having sort of big pauses while you're thinking. So, I always recommend, if you've got a list of questions that you think you might be asked, to give them to a friend or someone and let them ask you, and let you actually practice saying the responses aloud. Another common question, why are you looking? So this question is asked to understand your motivators, but it's also looking at matching you to the role. So think about explaining your reason positively. So try and avoid anything negative about your current company or boss. I've been in interviews where that turns into a sort of 5-minute discussion, and it's just not a place that you want to take the interview. And connect your motivation to what the role is offering. So try and avoid really bland statements like, I'm looking for a new challenge, or I'm looking to grow. They're very broad statements. They don't mean a lot. And really the person's trying to understand you and your motivators. So making really general statements doesn't really get you anywhere. If you have perhaps been fired from your last role, or something really bad happened there, I would not bring that up unless you're specifically asked, and then you obviously need to be honest and transparent. Then the question is what you're looking for. It's not looking in the past, it's looking to the future. So I would respond looking to the future. Another common question, what do you know about our company? Why are you interested in working for us? And to me, when you're going in for that interview, you want to show that you have researched the company, that you understand what they do. So some responses here, that you can write down if you're preparing, but again, practice saying them aloud. I understand that your company is involved in, I heard about something on the news, I've read about the culture, I've seen that you guys are doing a project in a particular area. Whatever it is that made you want to apply to that role, that's what you want to reflect back at that point. Tell me more about your current role, your most recent role. So that question is focused on the interviewer gaining a deeper insight into your skills and screening your skills and experience according to what they need for the job. So starting off with your job title and what your company does, unless of course you work for BHP or Foot Locker or Woolworths or something where everyone knows the company. But what you're trying to understand is maybe the 3 core responsibilities relevant to the role that you applied for. So you want to look at what they're looking for, and then you're reflecting that experience when you're talking about your current role, because the employer is looking, has this person done this before? How competent are they at doing this? What are your salary expectations? This can happen at the end of an interview, unless there was a specific salary advertised. Sometimes in more regulatory bodies, they have a band or something like that, so that won't come up. But basically, if it does, the question is trying to establish if you have reasonable or unreasonable expectations around money. So what salary you should be looking at is dependent on a lot of factors. So, if you look at your current situation, it can be demand for your skill set. It can be, competitiveness in the market, all of those factors, sort of your particular experience, what type of experience within that industry, all of those factors sort of roll into there. But what we're going to practice is how you indirectly delay the details of that until you're further on in the process. And I'll show you how to do that now. So if you are in a situation where money comes up and you want to delay that conversation, then try and keep that answer neutral, because a specific number can stop them progressing, or it can be used against you in the negotiation process, and I'll explain that. So if you come up with a figure that's low, it can be hard later in the process to negotiate up. They tend to stick with that figure, and you can move it up a little bit, but it can be limited. But if equally you say a figure that's sort of well over market range and you haven't had an opportunity to put your skills across to justify that, then that can also mean that you stopped in the process. So I would say that I've researched the market range for salaries and my expectations are in line with them. So there's great salary surveys. Recruiters can help you with that. If you get stuck, get in contact with us. But you can also turn that question around and ask if they have any indicators or a band within which they'd like to pay. At this point, the company hasn't yet fully understood your experience in depth, so it's a tricky one for them to answer. And equally, that makes them understand that it's difficult for you to put a specific number too. So, a quick way to say that is, at this point, my expectations are market related. In terms of a more specific number, I'd need to understand the role a bit more before I could be more specific. And that sort of makes them understand that that you're not being unrealistic with your expectations, but that both parties probably need to be a bit further down the process before you get to that point. In terms of role-specific questions, what I recommend is, if you take the job description or the job advertisement and you focus on the core responsibilities, some people call them competencies, or the selection criteria, the core things that the company are looking for, those are the things that they're going to ask you the questions about. So this format of interviewing is common as it allows the interviewers to assess how you've used those skills in real life scenarios. So when we're talking about behavioural interviewing, or STAR, which I'll explain, they're not looking for you to explain, over the last 10 years, I have used my team leadership experience. They're looking for you to give a specific example of a skill, with the view is that you demonstrate proof of performance or evidence, or you show them how you have in fact shown that skill. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So when it's behavioral interviewing, what you want to do is you want to explain the context of the skill in your specific role. So you're going to talk about a specific situation or event. Then you'll talk about the task, so what needed to be done, what the challenge was, what the action plan was. And then action, what you specifically did, so your process, how you went about it. Some people can slip into talking about teams a lot. What they're really looking for is your role, what you specifically did, and then what the effect was. So if you perhaps worked on redesigning a process, or something that resulted in a saving for the company, it can be great if you can put a figure or a percentage around that, so that it's like a concrete example. So these questions are commonly asked in the following way. So think of a time when, what happened when you were faced with, what did you do when, have you ever had this situation? So specific examples, tell us about a time where you were under pressure to deliver to a client. Tell us about a time where you made a mistake at work. What's the biggest challenge you have faced? And can you see how all of those examples they're looking for a specific example, and for you to describe, so that the interviewer is getting a picture of how, the context in which you've fulfilled that competency. If you're saying, okay, how do I work out exactly those questions? As I said, go back to the selection criteria or the main responsibilities. So if, for example, one of the selection criteria was the ability to manage projects from budget through to implementation, or from planning through to budget to implementation, then it's likely one of the questions will be, tell us about a time where you've managed a project from beginning to end. And what they're looking for is a specific example, and for you to run through that process of what you did so that they can understand your skills and experience better. So now let's look at some tough questions. I think I always like to, when I'm doing interview prep with people, is to throw in a couple of these. Um, what differentiates you from other candidates that are in the market? I mean, obviously, you don't know exactly who's applied for the role, and therefore you can't be specific, but it's a chance to really differentiate your skills and experience to what's commonly out there at your level. Um, Based on what you've heard about the role, what are the top 3 criteria we should be looking for? And that question is really making sure that you understand the role. And again, that comes back to what's the main selection criteria or job responsibilities? What's the core of the role? Um, what are your career goals? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? I think that's a tricky one because you might not have insight as to what the interviewer is actually looking for. So sometimes people say things like, I'm really ambitious and I want to climb the career ladder, and the interviewer is looking for someone who is going to settle in and be in the role for a few years. So obviously part of that is this the right role for you? But I think taking a softer approach there and saying, look, I'd like to get established in this role and to grow in this role, but if you ask me where I would like to go in the future, and describe where you'd like to go from there. What is your greatest weakness or weaknesses? I think over the last few years, lots of people have got, everyone understands that pick something, and like I'm a perfectionist, and then of course that sort of translates to actually being a positive perhaps. I think people understand that that's the game that people are trying to play there, and I think it's a bit inauthentic. So it's better if you have a look at something that is not key to the role, and be honest about it. So, for example, administration is not my favorite thing to do, but I do understand the role it has and the importance of records and keeping documentation up to date and so on. So I always put time aside for it. And in fact, I've sort of come to learn that by doing so, it keeps me organized and on track and feeling into control. So, that's an example you could use, but obviously think about yourself and how you're working on something. I think, everyone's got weaknesses, but if you're aware of them and you've got systems in place to help you overcome them, that's showing maturity and how you can manage that weakness. Tell us about a time where you've made a mistake or that you felt that you failed. A lot of people come to interviews and they think that they need to present this superstar sort of person. But ultimately, remember that we're going to possibly be working with those people. And so, everyone's made mistakes. Try and think through an example where it was a learning curve for you. What did you learn from it? And perhaps where it wasn't completely disastrous for the company that you worked for. But that's why I always like to preempt that by having a think about that. And what's your ideal work environment? Again, that's a tricky one. You might not know what's important to that company. So if, for example, you're interviewing at a company and they're blasted all over the news about how you can work from home, that's a kind of fairly simple one to answer. Working styles, things like that can be tricky if you're not quite sure how things are run there. And I always encourage people to sort of think about things that are important to them and put that across, but maybe without being too pedantic or black and white there. At the end of an interview, often people are asked, do you have any questions for me? And it might just be a courtesy, but this is where I think you can distinguish yourself. So this question sets candidates apart from, as the interviewer feels that you're assessing the opportunity. You're not just applying to what's ever out there and going to take it if you're given the role. I think when you don't have any questions to ask, it can come across as you just not being that interested in the role, or that you've not been thinking through when they've been talking, and it's that curiosity and interest. So suitable questions to ask. I'd pick 1 or 2 well thought out questions in relation to specific aspects of the role, so that it shows that you've done research and that you're interested in either the company or the team or the culture. I'd take care here not to kind of interrogate and get too deep into something, especially if someone who's interviewing you're not aware. Like I've seen, for example, software engineering interviews where someone's asking very technical questions and the person that's responding to them is not able to answer that, and that conversation keeps going. It's much better to say, oh, can we come back to that? It would be great if we could find out about that. And again, I wouldn't bring up money at this point. What you really want to do is make sure that the company is interested in you. And then when they come back to you, that's when that subtle kind of negotiations can start from there. So examples of good questions. What would be the focus for the first 30 to 60 days? What would you see as success in this role in the first year? What do people who are really successful in this role do well? And again, this is all tailored to the role that you're going for. And what's something new that you hope the person you hire can bring to the role? And I think that gets the interviewer opening up and talking in a non-threatening way for them. And that's where you gain insight into what's going on and if you can add value. So what I always encourage people to do at the end of an interview is to do a post-interview download, because you've done the interview, you've come out, you're either relieved or you think, you know what, there were things that I could have done better. And I just encourage people to run through this checklist. So what do I think about the job? Do I like the job? What's my gut feeling? What questions were asked? And what questions I didn't ask but maybe I should have, or I'd like to bring up? Do I have any reservations or concerns? Do I like who I'll be reporting to? Do I understand the leadership style? Do I get that kind of, did I get that feeling? Did I like the culture? Do I think that I would fit in there and be happy there? Am I clear on the role? Am I clear on the expectations that there would be of me? Am I clear on the support offered? And on any relevant training or professional development. Now, again, at this point, you probably won't have all these, but it's just reminding you to circle back to them, because what can happen is you go on an interview and then they come back and say, okay, we want to offer you the job. This is a good kind of stopping point to make sure that you're thinking about everything. So is there anything I need to clarify? What are the exciting aspects of the role? Do I want the job? If they called me for a decision, am I ready? Or what am I missing? What information do I need? Did I discuss my external responsibilities or anything that will hold up the process? So, sometimes you can have an interview and then afterwards you think, oh, I probably need to talk about the fact that I need to start later 2 days a week, or whatever the situation is. Then that's just a point to pop down so that you make sure that you cover that. Are there any questions that I should have answered better or that I wasn't prepared for? Because it's so real in that moment, but you might decide that's not the right role, and then you might not go on an interview for another 3 weeks or months or whatever the case is. Just jotting down those questions and thinking about how you would better answer them, that's a learning curve for you. How does this compare to my current role, if you've got one? How does this compare to my other options? So, sometimes when you're going out into the job market, you might have a number of interviews going on, and it's about being able to sort of calmly compare the advantages and disadvantages of both, and against your own situation. Generally people only leave if there is a better option out there than what they currently have. Money, has there been any discussion on money? What are my thoughts on that? Is there anything I need to clarify? Do I know what the next step is? And do I know what I want to do from here? And often that can be something. I always encourage people to just have a night's sleep and think about those things. And often it's by letting your brain relax that the important questions pop up. We do have a pre-interview checklist. Some of the things are really obvious, but they're things like make sure you give yourself enough time. There is nothing worse than running around because you can't actually find the building, or you haven't been able to park, or the parking that you usually use is full, or all those sorts of things. I know they sound really simple, but you want to be at an interview 10 to 15 minutes before, so that you can just calmly collect yourself and feel good going in. Feel free to send us an email at connect@edecision.com.au, and we can pop the checklist and the post-interview download through to you. And finally, good luck with things. If you have any questions, pop them through to us, and best of luck with your interviews.